It's 3 a.m. and your mind still won't shut up. You're lying there and it's replaying that thing you said, or rehearsing a fight with somebody who isn't even in the room, or running the same worst-case movie for the 100th time, the one where it all falls apart. Your body's exhausted, but that voice in your head just keeps going, and you can't find the off switch. Look, I'm not going to tell you to just think positive. That never worked and you know it. But by the end of this, you're going to understand something that changes everything. That voice in your head isn't you. And once you get that, really get it, it stops running your life. There's a guy named Eddie, 33, night shift security guard, Pittsburgh, sits alone at 3 a.m. with a head like a radio he can't turn off until he learned how. So listen to me, friend. You are not your thoughts. You're the one listening. Let's go. Chapter 1. The Radio That Won't Shut Off. It was 3 a.m. and Eddie was arguing with a man who wasn't there. Here's the scene. The lobby of an office building in downtown Pittsburgh, empty. Dead quiet except for the buzz of the fluorescent lights and the low hum of the vending machine in the corner. Eddie was at the security desk where he sat every night from 11 to 7, and in front of him was a bank of monitors, 6 little grey screens showing 6 empty hallways, the blue-white glow of them washing over his face in the dark. A cold cup of gas station coffee sat by his elbow, the kind he bought on the way in and forgot to drink. And in his head, a war. He was replaying a conversation with his boss from 3 days ago. Except he wasn't replaying it the way it happened. He was replaying it the way he wished it happened, where he had the perfect comeback, where he said the sharp thing instead of just nodding, where he walked out looking strong instead of small. He was actually mouthing the words a little, there in the dark, his lips moving, telling off a man who was home asleep in his bed and hadn't thought about Eddie once. And when that argument ran out, his brain didn't stop. It just switched channels. To the bills, to the rent that was due, to the credit card minimum he could barely cover, to the number in his checking account that made his stomach drop. And then it switched again, to a memory from years ago, something embarrassing, a thing he said at a party in his 20s that nobody else on earth remembered, and his brain served it up, fresh, hot, like it happened yesterday, and he actually winced, physically winced, alone, at 3 a.m., over nothing. Here's the thing about Eddie, and I need you to really see it, because it's the whole reason his life felt the way it felt. Eddie's mind never stopped. Ever. It was like a radio bolted to the inside of his skull, and somebody had lost the knob. It played all night, the arguments that never happened, the regrets from a decade ago, the worst-case movies of everything that could go wrong. And the cruelest part was that Eddie thought this was just him. He thought this racing, churning, never-quiet mind was who he was. He didn't know there was any other way to be. So he lived inside the noise, 8 hours a night at that desk, alone with the radio, and then he'd drive home as the sun came up, and the radio came with him. He'd catch himself yelling in the car, actually yelling, at somebody who wasn't there. And he'd lie down to sleep and the radio would still be going, and he'd scroll his phone to drown it out, blue light on his face again, and the scrolling just gave the radio new things to worry about. Let me tell you what that constant noise was actually costing him, because it was more than just a bad night's sleep. It was costing him his whole life, in real time, without him even noticing. Because while Eddie's body sat in that lobby, his mind was somewhere else, in the past, in the future, in an argument, in a worst case. He was never actually there. He'd drive home and not remember the drive. He'd eat and not taste the food. Somebody would talk to him and he'd miss half of it because the radio was louder than they were. He was physically present for his own life and mentally absent from every second of it. And here's the deeper cost. That radio wasn't neutral. It didn't play calm, helpful stuff. It played fear, regret, anger, comparison. So Eddie wasn't just distracted, he was being quietly tortured all day, every day, by his own head. He'd feel anxious and not know why, feel down and not know why, because the radio was running underneath everything, feeding him a steady drip of low-grade dread, and he'd stopped even hearing it as separate from himself. It was just the background hum of being Eddie, and it was miserable. Now here's the open loop I want you holding till the end of this chapter, because that night at 3 a.m. something small happened. Eddie was mid-argument with his absent boss when he caught himself, just for a second. He noticed, wait, I'm doing it again, I'm arguing with nobody. And in that one flicker of noticing, the radio went quiet, just for a breath. And in that quiet, a strange question floated up, one he'd never thought before. If I can hear the radio, then who's listening? He didn't have an answer. It slipped away, and the noise came roaring back. But that question, who's listening? It was the crack in everything. It was the beginning of him getting his life back. Hold that. We're getting there. Let me turn to you now because you know this radio. You've got your own. Maybe you're lying in bed right now with it going, rehearsing a conversation you're never gonna have, replaying something you said that you wish you could take back, running the worst-case movie of the thing you're scared of. Your body's tired, but your mind won't let you rest, and you can't figure out why you can't just stop thinking. And here's what I want you to hear. It's not just you, and it's not a flaw in you. Almost everybody's got the radio. Most people just never realize it's on. They think it's them. They think the anxious voice is them, the critical voice is them, the fearful running commentary is just how they are. And so they never question it, never turn it down, never get a second of peace from it. They spend their whole lives being dragged around by a voice they don't even know is separate from them. And it costs you the same thing it cost Eddie, your actual life. The real one, happening in front of you right now, while your mind is off in some argument or some worst case. You're missing it. Not because your life is bad, but because you're never in it. You're in the radio. So here's the one thing I want you to hold on to tonight before we go any further. That voice in your head is not you. It's just a voice. It's a radio. And a radio playing in a room doesn't mean the room is the radio. You're not the noise. You're the one who can hear it. And that difference, which sounds like nothing right now, is the difference between a life run by the radio and a life where you finally get to turn it down. Here's your assignment this week, and it's stupid small, on purpose, because you're tired and I know it. I'm not going to ask you to stop the thoughts. You can't. Nobody can. And anybody who tells you to just clear your mind has never actually tried. So don't fight the radio. This week, all I want you to do is catch it once. One time, like Eddie did, catch yourself mid-loop. Lying in bed, driving, at your desk. The moment you notice you're rehearsing a fight that isn't real, or replaying an old regret, or running a worst case, just notice it and say to yourself, quietly, there's the radio. That's it. Don't change it, don't stop it, just catch it and name it. There's the radio. Because you can't turn down a noise you don't even know is playing. The whole thing starts with hearing it as separate from you for 1 second. Just once this week, catch the radio in the act. You are not your thoughts. You're the one listening, and this week you just start listening on purpose. So Eddie sat there at that desk, the radio roaring back, arguing with a man who wasn't there. But that question wouldn't fully leave him. If I can hear it, who's listening? And a few nights later, he'd stumble onto the answer, and it was the most freeing thing he'd ever felt in his life, because he was about to discover that he was never the radio at all. Chapter 2: You Are Not Your Thoughts. A few nights later, Eddie figured out the thing that changed his whole life, and it happened because of a spider. Here's the scene. Same desk, same 6 grey monitors, same blue glow on his face at 3 a.m. But this night, there was a spider, a little one, crawling across the desk near his cold coffee. And Eddie watched it. Just watched it move across the desk, doing its spider thing, no agenda. And for a minute his mind went quiet because he was just looking at this bug. And then a thought popped up, some worry about work. And here's the thing, because his mind had just been quiet, watching the spider, he actually saw the thought arrive. Like he saw it come in. It wasn't there, and then it was there. And in that moment, something clicked that had never clicked before. He didn't make that thought. It just showed up, on its own, uninvited, like the spider crawling across the desk. He didn't decide to think it. It appeared all by itself, and he was just there, watching it appear. And that's when the answer to his question landed. If I can watch a thought arrive, then I'm not the thought. I'm the one watching it arrive. Let me slow down here, because this is the most important idea in the whole book, and if you get this one thing, everything else follows. You are not your thoughts. You're the one aware of your thoughts. Those are two completely different things, and almost nobody knows the difference. Eddie sure didn't, for 33 years. Here's how you know it's true. You can watch a thought. Right now, you could close your eyes and just wait, and a thought would pop up, and you could notice it. But if you can notice a thought, then there's a you doing the noticing that is separate from the thought. The thought is the thing being watched. You're the watcher. A radio playing in a room isn't the room. The room is just the space the radio plays in. And you're not the radio. You're the awareness the radio plays inside of. And here's why this changes everything, why it's not just some philosophy trick. For 33 years, Eddie was fused to his thoughts. When an anxious thought came, he didn't think, there's an anxious thought. He just became anxious. When an angry thought came, he became angry. When his mind said, you're a failure, he didn't hear it as a thought. He heard it as the truth about himself. There was no gap. Thought and Eddie were the same thing. So whatever the radio played, Eddie was. If the radio was scared, Eddie was scared. If the radio was raging, Eddie was raging. He had zero choice because he was the radio. But the second he saw the thought as separate, the second he became the watcher instead of the thought, a gap opened up, a little space between him and the noise. And in that space is everything, because in that space he gets to choose. He can watch the anxious thought go by without becoming anxious. He can hear, you're a failure, and go, there's that thought again, instead of collapsing into it. The gap is where freedom lives, and the gap only exists once you know you're the watcher, not the thought. Here's the open loop, because Eddie got scared of something here. He thought, okay, if I'm not my thoughts, then what am I? If that voice in my head isn't me, who's the real me? This is kind of terrifying. My whole life I thought I was that voice, and for a second it felt like the floor dropped out, like he didn't know who he was anymore. Hold that. If you're not the voice, then who are you? Because the answer isn't scary at all. It's the most solid, peaceful thing Eddie ever found. Let me turn to you, because you're fused to your thoughts too. Almost everybody is. Here's how you'd know. When a self-critical thought comes, you're not good enough, you always mess this up. Do you hear it as a thought, or do you just feel like it's true, like it's a fact about you? When you're anxious, do you notice there's anxiety, or do you just become the anxiety, swallowed by it? When someone makes you angry and your mind starts raging, is there any you watching the rage, or are you just gone, completely the rage? If there's no gap, if you just become whatever your mind serves up, then you're living exactly how Eddie lived, run by the radio, at the total mercy of whatever thought happens to show up. And thoughts show up randomly, uninvited, and half of them are garbage, fearful, critical, catastrophic. So if you are your thoughts, you're being jerked around all day by a voice that isn't even reliable, and you don't even know you have another option. Here's the answer to Eddie's fear. If you're not the voice, who are you? You're the awareness behind it, the watcher, the one who's been listening this whole time. And here's why that's not scary but freeing. That watcher, that quiet awareness, is calm. It's always been calm. It doesn't panic, it doesn't rage, it doesn't spiral. Those are all things the radio does. The watcher just watches, steady and quiet, like Eddie watching that spider. So when Eddie realized he was the watcher, not the noise, he realized that underneath all that chaos, there was a calm place in him that had been there the whole time. The storm was never him. He was the sky the storm passed through. And the sky is always fine, no matter how bad the storm looks. You don't have to create calm. You just have to realize you already are the calm thing, watching the noise. It was there all along, underneath. You just never knew to look for it. Here's your assignment this week, and it builds right on last week's. Last week you caught the radio. This week, take one tiny step further. When you catch a thought, instead of saying, "I'm anxious" or "I'm angry," I want you to say, "I notice a thought that I'm anxious. I notice a thought that I'm angry." Hear the difference? "I am anxious" fuses you to it. "I notice a thought that I'm anxious" puts you in the watcher's seat, with the little gap between you and the noise. That's the whole assignment. One word change. From "I am" to "I notice a thought that." It sounds tiny. It's not. Because every time you say, "I notice a thought that," you're stepping out of the radio and into the watcher. You're proving to yourself in real time that you're the one listening, not the noise itself. Practice it once a day this week. Feel the gap open up. That gap is where your whole life is hiding. You are not your thoughts. You're the one listening. And this week, you take your seat as the listener. So Eddie found the watcher, found the calm place underneath the noise, and for the first time in his life, there was a little daylight between him and the radio. But the radio wasn't done, because it had one trick that had fooled Eddie his whole life, a trick that made him believe every scary, cruel thing it said. It made him think that just because a thought was loud, it must be true. And Eddie was about to learn that his own mind had been lying to him for years. Chapter 3. The thought is not the truth. Eddie believed something for 3 days that turned out to be completely made up, and his own mind was the one that made it up. Here's the scene. It started on a Monday night at the desk. His boss had walked past earlier that day on Eddie's way out and given him a look. Just a look. Didn't smile, didn't say much. Kind of a flat, distracted expression. And that was it. That was the whole event. But the radio got hold of it, and by 3 a.m., sitting in that blue monitor glow, cold coffee by his elbow, Eddie's mind had built an entire disaster out of one look. He's gonna fire me. That look meant something. I've done something wrong. Somebody complained. They're gonna replace me with somebody younger, cheaper. I'm gonna lose the apartment. How am I gonna make rent with no job? On and on. A whole future collapsing, all of it feeling absolutely real, absolutely true, his heart actually pounding at the desk over it. For 3 days he carried that, barely slept, felt sick about it, rehearsed how he'd begged to keep his job. And then on Thursday his boss walked by and said, easy as anything, "Hey Eddie, good work on that incident report last week, real thorough." Smiled, kept walking. That was it. There was no disaster. There was never a disaster. The look on Monday? The guy was probably just tired, or thinking about his own bills, or had a headache. It had nothing to do with Eddie. The entire 3-day nightmare was built out of one neutral look and a whole lot of radio. And Eddie sat with that, kind of stunned, because he realized, I suffered for 3 days over something that wasn't even real. My mind made the whole thing up, and I believed every word of it. Let me pull the lesson out, because this is the trick that's been running your life too. Just because a thought is loud does not make it true. Just because a thought feels real does not make it real. Your mind lies. Constantly. Especially when it's scared. Here's the thing nobody tells you about your own head. Your thoughts are not facts. They're just suggestions, guesses, stories your brain throws up, a lot of them based on fear, on old wounds, on worst-case wiring left over from 1,000,000 years ago when your ancestors needed to assume every rustle in the grass was a tiger. Your brain is not built to tell you the truth. It's built to keep you alive, and to do that, it errs massively toward fear. It would rather scare you 1,000 times over nothing than miss one real threat. So it invents disasters. It reads danger into neutral looks. It tells you the worst thing constantly, not because it's true, but because that's the brain's factory setting. Eddie's mind told him, "You're getting fired," with total confidence, and it was dead wrong. But it felt true, because the radio doesn't play its lies in a little, "this might be false" voice. It plays them in the same voice it uses for everything, loud, certain, real sounding, and that's how it fools you. Here's the open loop, because Eddie got tangled up in something. He thought, okay, so my thoughts lie, but not all of them, right? Some thoughts are true and important. If I stop believing my thoughts, how do I know which ones to trust? How do I tell the difference between my mind lying to me and my mind actually warning me about something real? That's a genuinely important question, because you can't just dismiss every thought either. Hold that, because there's a clean way to tell, and it changed how Eddie handled his own head. Let me turn to you, because your mind lies to you too, every single day. Think about it. How many things have you dreaded that never happened? How many disasters did your mind promise you that never came? How many nights did you lie awake, sick over some worst case, and then the thing just worked out, or never even happened at all? You've suffered for years over things that were never real, meetings that went fine, texts that meant nothing, looks you misread, futures that never arrived. Your mind wrote horror stories and you believed every one, and almost none of them came true. And here's what it costs you. You're not living in reality. You're living in the version of reality your scared brain invents, and that version is darker, meaner, and more dangerous than the real one. You walk around braced for disasters that aren't coming, feeling anxious about problems that don't exist, believing cruel things about yourself that simply aren't true, all because your mind said them loud, and you assumed loud meant true. You've been taking dictation from a liar and calling it the news. Here's the answer to Eddie's question. How do you tell a real thought from a lie? Here's the test he found, and it's simple. First, is it a fact or is it a story? My boss gave me a look. That's a fact. That actually happened. My boss is going to fire me. That's a story the mind built on top of the fact. Learn to separate the two. The fact is usually small and neutral. The story is usually huge and scary. The story is almost always the lie. Second, is this thought coming from fear or from calm? A real, useful warning tends to come quietly, clearly. Hey, you should probably pay that bill. A lie comes loud, panicked, catastrophic, spiraling. You're gonna lose everything and end up on the street. Fear exaggerates. Fear catastrophizes. So when a thought shows up screaming the worst case, that's your tell. That's the radio lying, not reality warning. The calm, quiet thoughts are worth listening to. The loud, terrifying, spiraling ones are almost always the mind making stuff up. Eddie learned to ask, fact or story? Fear or calm? And most of his suffering turned out to be story, built by fear, made up, every bit of it. Here's your assignment this week. This week, when a scary or upsetting thought grabs you, the kind that spikes your heart, the "this is a disaster" kind, I want you to stop and ask two questions. 1. Is this a fact or a story? Separate what actually happened from what my mind added on top. 2. Is this coming from fear or from calm? And then, this is the key. Say to yourself, this is a thought, not a fact. My mind might be lying right now. You don't have to figure out the truth. You just have to stop automatically believing the scary story. Just crack the certainty. Because the radio's whole power comes from you believing it without question. The second you go, wait, is this actually true, or is this just my scared brain talking? You take the power back. You stop suffering for 3 days over a look that meant nothing. You stop dying 1,000 times for disasters that never come. You are not your thoughts. You're the one listening, and a smart listener doesn't believe everything the radio says. So Eddie learned his mind was a liar, a loud, convincing, fear-drunk liar, and he stopped taking every scary thought as gospel. But knowing the radio lies and actually catching it in the moment are two different things, because those thoughts come fast, and they grab you before you even know it. So Eddie needed to get better at watching, at seeing the thoughts coming before they swallowed him, and that's a skill, one he was about to start building. Chapter 4. Watch the Watcher. Eddie spent one whole night just watching his own mind, like a guy watching cars go by, and it was the strangest, most peaceful shift he'd ever felt. Here's the scene. Slow night at the desk. The building empty, the monitors quiet, that low vending machine hum in the corner, the blue glow on his face. And Eddie decided to try something. He'd gotten the idea that he was the watcher, not the thoughts, from the spider night. but it was still just an idea in his head. So this night, he decided to actually practice it, to just sit there and watch his own thinking on purpose for a while. And it was wild, because the second he started watching, he saw how much was going on in there. A thought about his rent, then a random memory of a song, then that old argument with his boss trying to start up again, then a worry about his car making a weird noise, then hunger, then a thought about the vending machine, then back to the rent. Thought after thought after thought, one crashing into the next, and Eddie just watched them, like standing on the side of a highway watching cars blow past. He didn't chase any of them. He didn't climb into any of them. He just noticed them come and noticed them go. And here's what happened. The longer he watched, the quieter it got. Not silent, but quieter, slower, like the thoughts, once they realized they were being watched instead of believed, lost some of their steam. And underneath, Eddie felt that calm again, the watcher's calm, steady, present, there. Let me pull the lesson out, because this is the actual skill, the one that everything else in this book depends on. There's a difference between thinking a thought and watching a thought, and that difference is a muscle you can build. When you think a thought, you're inside it. You're the driver, careening down whatever road the thought takes you. The worry leads to a worse worry, leads to a full spiral, and you're just along for the ride, gone, lost in it. But when you watch a thought, you step out of the car, you stand on the side of the road, and you let the thought drive past without getting in. You see it, there's a worry about rent, and instead of climbing in and letting it drive you into a panic, you just watch it go by. And another one comes, and you watch that go by too. That's it. That's the whole skill. Watching the traffic instead of being in the traffic. And it sounds simple, but it changes everything. Because a thought you're watching can't run you. It can only run you when you're inside it, believing it, driving it. The watching itself creates the gap, and in the gap, you're free. Now here's the thing Eddie had to understand, why this is a practice and not a one-time fix. He couldn't just decide, I'm the watcher now, and be done, because the mind pulls you back in, constantly. You'll be watching the thoughts go by, calm, in the gap, and then a really sticky thought comes, a juicy worry or a hot memory, and whoop, you're back in the car, driving, lost in it again, and you don't even notice it happened. That's normal. That's not failure. The skill isn't staying the watcher forever. Nobody can do that. The skill is noticing when you've been pulled back into the car and calmly stepping back out onto the roadside again, over and over. Get pulled in, step back out. Get pulled in, step back out. Every time you step back out, the muscle gets stronger. Here's the open loop, because Eddie hit a frustration here. He kept getting pulled back in. He'd watch the thoughts for maybe 30 seconds, feel the calm, and then snap. He'd be lost in some worry again, having completely forgotten he was even practicing, and it frustrated him. He thought, I'm terrible at this. I can't even watch my own mind for a full minute without getting sucked back in. Maybe my mind's just too loud. Maybe this doesn't work for me. Hold that. Does getting pulled back in mean you're failing? Because the answer is the exact opposite of what Eddie thought, and getting it right is what let him keep going instead of quitting. Let me turn to you, because you live inside your thoughts almost all the time. Nearly everybody does. Here's how you'd know. When you worry, do you watch the worry, or do you disappear into it, spiraling from one bad thought to the next, until 20 minutes are gone and you're a wreck? When a memory grabs you, do you notice it, or are you just suddenly back there, reliving it? Most of your day, you're not watching your mind. You're lost in it. In the car, driving, at the mercy of wherever the thoughts take you. And they usually take you somewhere anxious, because that's the radio's favorite destination. And here's what it costs you. You never get a break. You're never just here, calm, present, watching life happen. You're always 3 thoughts deep in something: a worry, a plan, a regret, a replay. You've never learned to stand on the roadside and let the traffic pass. So the traffic runs you over, all day, every day, and you call it just how my mind is. Here's the answer to Eddie's frustration. Does getting pulled back in mean you're failing? No, getting pulled back in is the exercise. Here's the thing people get totally wrong. They think the goal is to watch your mind without ever getting distracted, and that getting pulled back in is a mistake. It's not. The noticing that you got pulled back in, that's the entire rep. That's the bicep curl. Think about it. Every time you realize, oh, I got lost in a thought again, that realization is you stepping back into the watcher. So the getting lost isn't the failure. The getting lost is what gives you the chance to practice coming back. If you never got pulled in, you'd never get to practice returning. So Eddie, getting yanked back into worry 50 times a night and calmly returning 50 times, he wasn't failing at the practice. He was doing 50 reps of the most important mental skill there is. The returning is the whole workout. You will get pulled in 10,000 times. Good. That's 10,000 chances to build the muscle. Here's your assignment this week. Once a day this week, and it only takes 2 minutes. You can do it at a red light, at your desk, in bed. I want you to just watch your mind, like watching traffic. Sit there and notice the thoughts come and go. Don't stop them. Don't chase them, just watch them drive past. There's a worry, there's a memory, there's a plan. Let them pass. And when you get pulled back in, when you suddenly realize you've been lost in a thought for a while, do not get mad at yourself. That's the rep. Just go, got pulled in, and calmly step back out to the roadside and keep watching. Getting pulled in and stepping back out, that's not you failing at the exercise. That is the exercise. 2 minutes a day, that's the whole thing. You're building the one muscle that sets you free from the radio. You are not your thoughts. You're the one listening. And this week, you practice listening on purpose, stepping out of the traffic, one thought at a time. So Eddie started building the muscle, watching the traffic, getting pulled in, stepping back out, over and over, night after night at that desk. But there was one kind of thought that grabbed him harder than any other, one kind of car he couldn't help but climb into every single time it drove past. The past, the old regrets, the why did I do that, the memories that made him wince. And Eddie was stuck replaying them on a loop he couldn't break. Chapter 5. The Loop of the Past. There was one memory Eddie had replayed so many times he'd worn a groove in his own brain, and it happened when he was 19. Here's the scene, present day first. Eddie at the desk, 3 a.m., blue glow, cold coffee, slow night. And his mind, with nothing to do, reaches for the old favorite. It's a memory from 14 years ago. Eddie, 19, at his first real job, and he'd made a mistake in front of everybody. Said something dumb, got laughed at, got embarrassed in a way that burned, and it was over in 30 seconds, 14 years ago, and not one single person who was there remembers it. But Eddie remembers, because Eddie has replayed it maybe 10,000 times, and he replays it again now, at the desk, feels the same hot shame in his chest, the same wince actually shifts in his chair like his body's trying to escape a thing that happened 14 years ago. And right behind that one comes the others. The thing he said to his ex, the opportunity he didn't take, the why did I do that, why did I say that, why am I like this? A whole highlight reel of his worst moments, playing on a loop at 3 a.m., torturing a guy who did nothing tonight but sit at a desk. And here's what Eddie finally asked himself, watching it happen this time, because he was building that watcher muscle now. Why do I keep doing this? Why do I keep pressing play on the worst moments of my life over and over? What am I even getting out of this? Let me pull the lesson out, because this loop has stolen more of your life than you know. The past is over. It's done. It exists nowhere except in your head. That embarrassing moment from 14 years ago isn't happening. It happened once, and then it ended. And the only place it still lives is on the tape Eddie keeps rewinding and playing. And every single time he plays it, he doesn't just remember the pain, he re-feels it, fresh. His body doesn't know the difference between a real event and a vivid replay. So when Eddie replays the shame from 14 years ago, his body pumps out the shame chemicals right now, as if it's happening right now. He's not remembering the wound, he's re-cutting it 10,000 times. So Eddie wasn't hurt by his past, he was hurt by his replaying of it. The event lasted 30 seconds, the suffering has lasted 14 years, and Eddie's the one who's been pressing play the whole time. Here's the open loop, because Eddie stumbled into a real question here. He thought, okay, but I can't just erase the past. I can't pretend it didn't happen. And don't I need to remember my mistakes so I don't repeat them? If I stop replaying them, am I just ignoring my problems, refusing to learn? That felt like a real objection. Hold that. Isn't replaying the past how you learn from it? Because the answer is the difference between actually growing and just torturing yourself, and Eddie needed to get it right. Let me turn to you, because you've got a loop too. Everybody past a certain age does. You've got a moment, probably several, that you replay. The thing you said, the thing you didn't do, the relationship that ended, the mistake that cost you, the version of yourself you're ashamed of. And you press play at 2 a.m. in the shower, driving, and you re-feel all of it, fresh, like it's happening now. The regret, the shame, the why did I, the if only I had. You've probably replayed some of these hundreds of times, thousands. And here's what it costs you. You're serving a sentence for a crime that's already over. The past already happened. You don't have to keep paying for it every single day. But you do. You keep dragging it into the present, re-feeling it, letting a 30-second moment from years ago poison a night that had nothing wrong with it. You're not living in today. You're living in a courtroom, on trial for your past, and you're the judge, the jury, and the guy pressing rewind. And the sentence never ends, because you keep restarting it. Here's the answer to Eddie's question. Isn't replaying the past how you learn? No, and here's the crucial difference. There's a difference between learning from the past and replaying the past. Learning happens once. You look at the mistake, calmly, you pull the lesson out. Okay, I shouldn't have said that. Here's what I do differently. And then you're done. You keep the lesson and you put the memory down. That's learning, and it takes one time, maybe a few. But replaying is different. Replaying is running the same painful scene over and over with no new lesson, just re-feeling the shame, the regret, the pain. That's not learning. That's self-punishment dressed up as reflection. And here's how you tell them apart. Learning leaves you wiser and lighter. Replaying leaves you hurt and heavier. If you've watched the tape 100 times and you're not getting any new wisdom from it, just the same old pain, then you already learned everything you're going to learn from it, and now you're just torturing yourself. The lesson's been extracted. You can put the tape down. Eddie realized he'd learned the lesson from that 19-year-old moment about 1,000 replays ago. Everything after that was just self-punishment, pure, pointless pain. Here's your assignment this week. This week, when you catch yourself replaying an old regret, pressing play on the tape, I want you to do two things. First, ask, have I already learned the lesson here? If yes, and it almost always is, then you say to yourself, I've got the lesson, I don't need to feel this again, I can put it down. And then gently, using that watcher muscle, you let the memory drive on past instead of climbing into it. And second, if there's a real lesson you haven't fully pulled out, pull it out once, on purpose. Calm. Here's what this taught me. And then release the memory. Keep the lesson. Drop the tape. Because you don't owe your past this. You don't have to keep bleeding for something that stopped happening years ago. You already served the time. You're allowed to put it down. You are not your thoughts. You're the one listening, and you don't have to keep listening to the same painful song from 14 years ago on repeat. So Eddie started putting the old tapes down, learned the lessons, released the memories, stopped recutting 14-year-old wounds at 3 a.m. But his mind had another trick. Because when it got bored of torturing him with the past, it turned the other direction, to the future, and it started making movies, vivid, terrifying movies of everything that could go wrong, and Eddie was about to learn how many times a person can die for a disaster that never comes. Chapter 6. The Movie of the Worst Case. Eddie watched his own death in a car crash one night, in full color, and then he got in his car and drove home perfectly fine. Here's the scene. It was near the end of a shift, maybe 5 a.m., and his car had been making a weird noise lately, that little rattle he couldn't afford to get checked. And sitting at the desk, blue glow on his face, the radio started up. Except this time it wasn't the past, it was the future, and it made a movie. The rattle means the brakes. The brakes are gonna fail on the highway tomorrow. He's gonna be doing 70 and the pedal's gonna go soft and there's gonna be a truck, and Eddie actually saw it. Vivid, the whole crash in detail. And then the movie kept going, because it always does. He's in the hospital, he can't work, he loses the job, he can't make rent, he's evicted, he's got nothing. It all falls apart completely. His heart was slamming, his hands were a little sweaty. Sitting perfectly still, safe, at a desk, at 5 a.m., his body in full panic over a movie his mind was making up. And then his shift ended, and he walked out to his car, and he drove home, and the brakes worked fine. There was no crash, no truck, no hospital, no eviction, nothing. The whole catastrophe he'd just lived through in high definition, it never happened. It was never going to happen. It was a movie. And Eddie had bought a ticket and sat through the whole thing, terrified, for nothing. Let me pull the lesson out, because this movie has cost you more peace than almost anything. Your mind makes movies of the worst case, vivid ones, and your body can't tell the difference between a real disaster and a movie of a disaster. So when your mind plays the worst case film, your body reacts as if it's actually happening. The racing heart, the tight chest, the dread, all of it, over an event that exists nowhere but in the theater of your own head. And here's the brutal math of it. Eddie had imagined that car crash and 100 other disasters over and over. Losing his job, getting sick, ending up broke and alone. He'd lived through each of these terrible things dozens, hundreds of times, in his mind in full color, feeling all the fear each time. And almost none of them ever happened. There's an old line that gets at this. A coward dies 1,000 deaths. A brave man dies but one. It's not about being a coward, it's about this exact thing. Eddie died in that car crash 100 times in his imagination. If it ever actually happened, that'd be one time. But his fearful mind made him live it 100 times over, for free, for nothing. He suffered the disaster again and again, and the disaster never even came. Here's the open loop, because Eddie caught himself in a real trap here. He thought, but wait, what if imagining the worst case actually protects me? What if worrying about the crash makes me more careful, keeps me safe? Isn't it smart to think through everything that could go wrong? If I stop worrying, am I just being reckless, leaving myself open to disaster? That's the exact story worry tells to justify itself. Hold that. Does worrying actually protect you? Because the answer is what freed Eddie from a lifetime of imaginary catastrophes. Let me turn to you, because your mind makes these movies too, probably tonight. You've done it. You've lain awake running the worst case film, the diagnosis, the breakup, the money running out, the thing you're scared of playing out in vivid detail. You've sat in a waiting room having already imagined the bad news 10 times before the doctor even walked in. You've stared at a text and imagined the whole relationship ending before they even replied. You've lived through disasters fully in your body, disasters that then never happened. And when they didn't happen, did you get that time back? That peace? No, it was just gone, spent on a movie. And here's what it costs you. You're paying in real fear, real dread, real lost sleep for events that don't exist. Your worst-case movies feel like preparation, but they're just suffering, advanced suffering, for things that mostly never come. And even the rare thing that does happen, you didn't need to suffer it 50 times beforehand. You'd have handled it once when it came. Instead, you handle it 50 times in your head first, and then once for real. 51 times the pain for a one-time event. That's the theft. Your mind is selling you tickets to horror movies about your own life, and you keep buying them, and they're wrecking you. Here's the answer to Eddie's question. Does worrying actually protect you? No. And here's the clean distinction that set him free. There's a difference between planning and worrying. Planning is useful, calm, and it happens once. The car's making a noise, okay, I'll get it looked at when I can, and I'll drive a little careful till then. Done. That's a plan. It's practical, it's quiet, and then you move on. Worrying is different. Worrying is running the crash movie over and over, feeling the terror with no action attached, just endless catastrophic what-ifs. Planning prevents problems. Worrying just simulates them painfully on a loop and prevents nothing. Here's how you tell them apart. Planning ends with a calm action step and then stops. Worrying never ends and never produces an action, it just spins. So when your mind starts the worst-case movie, ask, is there an action here, or am I just suffering? If there's a real action, take it once, calmly, then let it go. If there's no action, just the movie, that's pure worry, pure imaginary suffering, and you can walk out of that theater. Eddie's noise? The action was, get it checked when I've got the money. That's it. One calm step. Everything else, the crash, the hospital, the eviction, was just a horror movie, and he stopped buying tickets. Here's your assignment this week. This week, when your mind starts a worst-case movie, the vivid disaster, the spiral of everything going wrong, I want you to stop and ask one question. Is there an action here, or am I just watching a horror movie? If there's a real, doable action, take it once, and then let the worry go. If there's no action, just the terror, then name it. This is a movie. It's not happening. I'm suffering for nothing. And walk out of the theater. Use your watcher muscle. Let the movie play on the screen without you sitting in the seat. Because you don't have to die 100 deaths for a disaster that's probably never coming. You can plan for real problems in one calm step and let the rest of the movies play to an empty theater. Stop buying tickets to your own worst nightmares. You are not your thoughts, you're the one listening, and you don't have to sit through every horror movie your mind wants to play. So Eddie stopped buying tickets to the worst-case movies, started asking, action or horror film, and walking out of the theater when there was nothing to actually do. But he was starting to notice something. He had some say in all this. He couldn't stop thoughts from coming, but he was starting to see he had a choice about which ones he fed. And that choice, it turned out, was quietly deciding what kind of person he was becoming. Chapter 7. Feed the Right Wolf. Eddie noticed that two thoughts showed up at the exact same moment one night, and which one he fed changed his entire shift, and he realized it might be changing his entire life. Here's the scene. It was a rough night. Eddie had checked his bank account before his shift, that sick little drop in the stomach, rent coming, not quite enough cushion. And he got to the desk, blue glow, cold coffee, and two thoughts showed up almost at once. The first one, you're broke. You're 33 and you're a night security guard making $19 an hour, sitting alone in an empty building while everybody your age is asleep next to somebody in a house they own. You're behind. You're a loser. This is all you're ever gonna be. And the second one, quieter, right behind it. You showed up tonight. You always show up. You're covering your bills, barely, but you're covering them. Nobody's helping you, and you're still standing. And you're doing this work on yourself right now that most people never do. Both true, in a way. Both right there, offered up at the same moment. And Eddie noticed he got to choose which one to grab onto, which one to feed. And that night, for once, instead of automatically grabbing the first one like he always did, he grabbed the second. And he watched his whole night change. He felt steadier, lighter. Same empty building, same $19 an hour, same bank account, but a completely different shift because he fed a different thought. Let me pull the lesson out, because this is where you start getting real power over your mind. There's an old story, you've probably heard a version of it. A grandfather tells his grandson there are two wolves fighting inside every person. One is fear, anger, shame, self-hatred, the worst case, the you're a loser. The other is calm, courage, hope, the steadier truth. And the two wolves are always fighting, and the kid asks, which one wins? And the grandfather says, the one you feed. That's it. That's the whole thing. You can't stop both wolves from showing up. The fearful thought and the steadier thought will both come, uninvited, side by side. You already learned you can't control which thoughts arrive, but you can control which one you feed, which one you give your attention to, which one you turn up, which one you climb into and let run. And whichever one you feed grows. The thought you attend to gets stronger, louder, more automatic. The one you starve gets weaker, quieter, easier to ignore. Eddie had been feeding the mean wolf his whole life. Every time two thoughts showed up, he grabbed the cruel one, the fearful one, the "you're a loser" one, automatically, without even knowing he had a choice. So that wolf got huge, strong, ran his whole head. And the kinder, steadier wolf got so starved he could barely hear it. But it was there. It had always been there. He'd just never fed it. Here's the open loop, because Eddie worried this was just fake. He thought, isn't this just lying to myself, just positive thinking, forcing myself to think happy thoughts when the truth is, I am broke and behind. Feeding the nice wolf feels fake, like I'm just pretending everything's fine when it's not. That's a real objection, and it's important, because forced fake positivity doesn't work, and Eddie could feel that. Hold that. Is feeding the good wolf just lying to yourself? Because the answer is what made this actually work for him instead of feeling like a cheap trick. Let me turn to you because you're feeding a wolf right now, probably the wrong one. Here's how you'd know. When something goes wrong, which thought do you automatically grab? The harsh one or the kind one? When you look at your life, which voice do you turn up? You're behind, you're failing, everybody's ahead of you. Or, you're doing your best with what you've got, and you're still here. Most people feed the mean wolf on autopilot. They grab the cruelest interpretation of everything, every time, without realizing they had another option sitting right there. And they wonder why they feel so bad all the time. And here's what it costs you. You're building your own inner world, one fed thought at a time. And if you keep feeding the mean wolf, you're building a brutal place to live. Your own head becomes a hostile environment, a voice that attacks you all day, that grabs the worst take on everything, that's gotten so strong from years of feeding that it drowns out every kinder truth. You didn't choose to feel this bad, but you did, without knowing it, keep feeding the wolf that makes you feel this way. Here's the answer to Eddie's worry. Is feeding the good wolf just lying to yourself? No, and here's the key that makes all the difference. Feeding the good wolf is not about lying or forcing fake positivity. It's about choosing the equally true, kinder interpretation over the cruel one. Look, when Eddie fed the second thought, he didn't lie. He didn't say, I'm rich and everything's perfect. That would be fake, and his mind would have rejected it instantly. He said something that was also true. I show up, I'm covering my bills alone, I'm still standing. Both wolves were telling the truth. You're broke and behind. True. You're showing up and surviving on your own. Also true. Same facts. Two true stories. The mean wolf isn't more honest than the kind wolf. It just feels more honest because you've fed it so long. So feeding the good wolf isn't lying. It's refusing to let the cruelest true story be the only one you tell. There's always a truer, fuller, kinder version of the facts. One that includes your effort, your survival, your strength, and you're allowed to feed that one instead. That's not positive thinking. That's just refusing to be your own worst enemy. Here's your assignment this week. This week, catch one moment where the mean wolf shows up, the harsh thought, the "you're a failure," the cruel take. And when it does, look for the other wolf, the equally true, kinder version of the same situation, not a lie, a truer, fuller take that includes your effort and your strength. I'm behind becomes, I'm behind and I'm still fighting, alone, and that counts. And then feed that one. Give it your attention. Turn it up. Say it to yourself on purpose. You're not going to feel it right away. The mean wolf's been fed for years. He's still bigger. That's fine. You're not trying to win the fight this week. You're just starting to feed the other wolf, one thought at a time. Because whichever one you feed grows, and you get to choose. That choice, that's real power over your own mind. You are not your thoughts. You're the one listening, and you get to decide which voice you turn up. So Eddie started feeding the right wolf, catching the cruel thought, finding the truer, kinder one, and feeding that. And slowly, the mean wolf got a little quieter. But some thoughts and feelings were too big, too tangled to just out-argue with a better wolf. Sometimes the feeling would grab him, and he couldn't even tell what it was, just a dark, heavy fog he couldn't name. And Eddie was about to learn a strange trick, that the moment you can name the thing, it starts to lose its grip on you. Chapter 8. Name it to tame it. Eddie sat in a dark fog for 2 hours one night before he figured out it had a name, and the second he named it, half of it lifted. Here's the scene. Eddie came into his shift already heavy. Not from any one thing, just this dark, low, pressing feeling that had followed him all day. He sat down at the desk, blue glow, cold coffee, and the feeling sat on his chest like a weight. And it wasn't a thought he could argue with exactly. It was just a fog. A heavy grey fog with no shape, and it made everything feel pointless and bleak, and he couldn't even tell what it was. He just felt bad all over and didn't know why. And for 2 hours he sat in it, miserable, the fog running the show. Until, using that watcher muscle he'd been building, he stopped and actually looked at the feeling. Tried to figure out what it even was. And he sat with it and looked closer, and slowly it came into focus. Underneath the fog was loneliness. That was it, plain loneliness. He was 33, working nights, alone in an empty building while the world slept, and he was lonely, and he hadn't let himself see it. And under the loneliness, a little fear that it might always be this way. And here's the strange thing. The moment he named it, oh, this is loneliness, and some fear, the fog changed. It didn't vanish, but it lifted, maybe halfway. It went from a formless, suffocating grey cloud to a specific, nameable feeling. I'm lonely tonight. And a specific feeling you can hold. A formless fog just swallows you. Naming it turned the monster into something Eddie could actually look at. Let me pull the lesson out, because this is a real, almost weird trick of the mind, and it works. Name it to tame it. When a feeling is unnamed, just a vague, formless, bad feeling, it's at its most powerful. It fills everything. It has no edges. It swallows you whole, and you can't do anything about it because you don't even know what it is. But the moment you name it, this is loneliness, this is anxiety, this is anger, this is grief, something shifts. It goes from a shapeless fog that has you to a specific thing that you're looking at. And the second you're looking at it, naming it, you're back in the watcher's seat. You've got that gap again between you and the feeling. The feeling is now a thing you're observing, not a fog you're drowning in. There's actually something real behind this. When you put a feeling into words, when you name it, it settles the alarm part of your brain a little. Naming moves the feeling from the raw, panicky, wordless part of your mind up to the part that thinks and observes. That's not woo, that's just what happens. The naming itself calms the storm a little every time. The fog becomes a word, and a word you can handle. Here's the open loop, because Eddie got confused about something. He thought, wait, doesn't naming a bad feeling and focusing on it just make it worse? Aren't I supposed to distract myself from bad feelings, not stare right at them and label them? Won't naming loneliness just make me feel more lonely? That's what most people believe, that you deal with bad feelings by looking away from them. Hold that. Does naming a feeling make it worse? Because the answer is the opposite of what Eddie expected, and it's what let him finally handle his own emotions instead of running from them. Let me turn to you, because you've got the fog too. Everybody does. Here's how it shows up. You feel off, heavy, irritable, anxious, down. But if somebody asked you, what's wrong, you couldn't really say. It's just a bad feeling with no name, running underneath your whole day, making everything harder. And what do you do with it? You probably do what almost everybody does. You try to escape it. You scroll, you snack, you distract, you numb. Anything to get away from the formless bad feeling. But you never name it. You never turn and look at it and go, what is this actually? And here's what it costs you. The fog never lifts, because you never look at it. You spend your days being pushed around by feelings you've never even identified, running from them, numbing them, drowning them out, and they just keep running underneath, unnamed and therefore untamed, controlling your mood and your choices from the shadows. You can't handle what you won't name, so you never handle any of it. You just keep running. Here's the answer to Eddie's confusion. Does naming a feeling make it worse? No. And here's the crucial difference. There's a difference between naming a feeling and drowning in it. Drowning is what you're afraid of, sinking into the loneliness, wallowing, feeding it, making it bigger. But naming is the opposite of drowning. Naming is stepping back and labeling it from the watcher's seat. There's loneliness. That little bit of distance, the naming, is what stops the drowning. Think about it. When you're drowning in a feeling, you are the feeling, no gap. When you name it, you create the gap. I notice loneliness instead of I am drowning, and that gap is what tames it. So naming doesn't pull you deeper in, it pulls you out, just enough to look at the thing instead of being swallowed by it. Eddie didn't wallow in the loneliness. He named it, once, calmly, and that naming gave him the distance to hold it instead of drown in it. The fog became a word, and the word had edges, and edges mean it's not infinite, not everything, just one nameable feeling passing through. Here's your assignment this week. This week, when the fog rolls in, when you feel that formless, heavy, bad feeling with no name, instead of running from it or numbing it, I want you to stop and name it. Look at it from the watcher's seat and ask, what is this actually? And then put one word on it. This is anxiety. This is loneliness. This is anger. This is sadness. Just name it plainly once. You don't have to fix it. You don't have to make it go away. You just have to name it. Turn the formless fog into a specific, nameable thing you're looking at instead of drowning in. And watch what happens. The naming itself takes some of the power out of it. The monster shrinks when you say its name. Because a feeling you can name is a feeling you can hold, and a feeling you can hold can't run your whole life from the shadows anymore. You are not your thoughts. You're the one listening, and now, the one who can name what you hear. Name it, and it starts to lose its grip. So Eddie learned to name the fog, to turn the formless, heavy feelings into specific, nameable things he could actually hold, and they stopped running him from the shadows. But naming the feeling was just the start. Because underneath every feeling was a story Eddie was telling himself about what everything meant. And he was about to discover that he'd been telling himself the darkest possible version his whole life. And that the exact same facts could make a completely different story. Chapter 9. The Story You Tell Yourself. Eddie's co-worker didn't wave back one morning, and Eddie built an entire story about it, until he found out the real reason, and it blew the whole thing apart. Here's the scene. End of a shift, 7 a.m. The day guy, Marcus, the guard who took over the morning, came in to relieve Eddie, and Eddie said, "Morning," and gave a little nod, and Marcus just walked past, didn't nod back, didn't say anything, kind of stone-faced, went straight to the desk. And Eddie's mind got right to work on the drive home, cracked windshield, grey Pittsburgh morning. It built a story. Marcus doesn't like me. He thinks I'm weird or bad at the job. Everybody probably thinks that. I'm the guy nobody connects with. I'm just fundamentally hard to like. That's why I'm alone. That's why I work nights. That's the whole problem with me. A whole story spun out of one guy not nodding back. And by the time Eddie got home, the story wasn't about a nod anymore. It was about Eddie being unlovable from a nod. And then the next morning, Marcus came in and said, "Hey man, sorry about yesterday. I got a call right before my shift. My mom's in the hospital. I was kind of out of it, didn't even see you. Everything okay with you?" His mom was in the hospital. That was it. The stone face had nothing to do with Eddie. It was never about Eddie at all. And the whole story Eddie built, "I'm unlovable, nobody connects with me, that's the problem with me," was made of nothing. Pure fiction. Spun out of one neutral moment that Eddie had filled in with the darkest possible meaning. Let me pull the lesson out, because this is one of the biggest ones in the whole book. Almost nothing that happens to you means anything on its own. The events are just events, neutral, blank. A guy doesn't nod. A text goes unanswered. You don't get the call back. Your friend seems short with you. These things happen, and they don't come with a meaning attached. You attach the meaning. You tell the story about what it means. And here's the thing. You get to choose that story. But most people don't know they're choosing, so they just automatically grab the darkest one. Eddie took a neutral event, a nod not returned, and wrote a dark story. I'm unlovable. But the exact same event could have been a dozen other stories. He's having a rough morning. He didn't see me. He's just not a morning person. All fit the same fact. Eddie chose I'm unlovable, not because it was true, but because that was the story he always reached for. He was a guy who took blank events and painted them black every time on autopilot, and then he lived inside those black paintings and wondered why his life felt so dark. Here's the open loop, because Eddie got worried here. He thought, okay, but I can't just tell myself whatever story I want. What if the dark story is the true one sometimes? What if Marcus really did dislike me? Isn't telling myself a nicer story just delusion, just refusing to face reality? That's a fair worry. Hold it. How do you choose a better story without lying to yourself about reality? Because getting this right is the difference between wisdom and delusion, and Eddie needed to land it. Let me turn to you, because you're telling yourself stories all day, and I'd bet you reach for the dark ones too. Here's how you'd know. Someone doesn't text back, "What's your story?" They're busy, or they're mad at me, I did something wrong. You make a mistake at work, "What's your story?" I had an off day, or I'm incompetent, I'm gonna get found out. Something goes wrong. Is it, this is a rough patch, or my life is falling apart and it's my fault? Most people, when the event is neutral and the meaning is unclear, automatically fill in the darkest possible story, and they don't even realize they're doing it. They think they're seeing reality, when really they're just seeing their own dark painting. And here's what it costs you. You're living in a world that's much darker than the real one, not because bad things are happening, but because you're interpreting neutral things as bad, constantly, and then living inside those interpretations as if they're facts. You take a blank day and paint it black, and then feel bad about the black paint you added. You're not suffering from your life, you're suffering from the story you're telling about your life, and you've been telling the darkest possible version on autopilot for years. Here's the answer to Eddie's worry. How do you choose a better story without lying? Here's the key. You're not choosing the nicest story or the fake story. You're choosing the most useful, true story from the ones that actually fit the facts. Look, when Marcus didn't nod, there were many stories that fit. He dislikes me. He's having a bad day. He didn't see me. Eddie had no evidence for the dark one. None. He just assumed it. So the dark story wasn't facing reality. It was one guess among many, and he picked the most painful one for no reason. The honest move isn't to swap it for a fake happy story. It's to notice you don't actually know, and then, since you don't know, choose the story that's both plausible and useful, instead of the one that's just painful. He's probably having a rough morning. Fit the facts just as well as I'm unlovable, and it was 100 times more useful and more likely true. That's not delusion. That's just refusing to convict yourself on zero evidence. And when the dark story is actually true, when you've got real proof someone's upset with you, then you deal with that, the real thing, calmly. But most of the time, you've got no proof. You've just got a neutral event and a dark habit. And you're allowed to drop the dark habit. Here's your assignment this week. This week, catch yourself telling a dark story about a neutral event, the unanswered text, the short reply, the look, the thing that must mean something bad about you. And when you catch it, ask two things. 1. Do I actually know this is true, or am I guessing? Almost always guessing. 2. What's another story that fits these same facts just as well? Find the equally true, more useful version. They're mad at me becomes, they're probably just busy, I don't actually know. And then choose that one on purpose until you have real evidence otherwise. Because you're the one writing the story of your own life every single day. You've been writing the darkest version out of pure habit. This week, you start writing a truer, fairer one. Same facts, different story, whole different life. You are not your thoughts. You're the one listening, and you're also the one telling the story. So tell yourself a fairer one. So Eddie started catching his dark stories, questioning them, and choosing truer, fairer ones. And the world got a little lighter, not because it changed, but because he stopped painting it black. But he realized something. It wasn't just the stories he told, it was the stuff he was letting into his head in the first place. The feed, the news, the comparison. He was feeding the radio its raw material every single day. And Eddie was about to learn he had to start guarding the gate. Chapter 10, Guard the Gate. Eddie realized his 3 a.m. misery had a source, and the source was a glowing rectangle in his own hand. Here's the scene. Slow night at the desk, blue glow of the monitors on his face, and the other blue glow, his phone, in his hand. Because on the quiet nights, Eddie scrolled for hours, And this particular night, he actually paid attention to what the scrolling did to him, because he was building that watcher muscle now. He watched himself scroll. And here's what came through that little screen in 20 minutes. A guy he went to high school with, on a beach in Mexico, living my best life. Somebody's new house, somebody's engagement, then the news, 3 different disasters, everything's terrible, the world's on fire. Then an argument in the comments, people tearing each other apart. Then an ad telling him he wasn't enough without some product. Then back to somebody's highlight reel, everybody richer, happier, further ahead than Eddie. And Eddie noticed, by the time he put the phone down, he felt worse, anxious, behind, bleak. And then he'd sit there and wonder why the radio was so loud and so dark tonight. And it clicked. I've been feeding it. Everything I just poured into my head, the comparison, the disasters, the outrage, the you're not enough. That's the raw material the radio's gonna play back at me all night. I'm loading the gun that shoots me. Let me pull the lesson out, because this one's simple but almost nobody does it. Your mind plays back what you put into it. Whatever you feed your attention all day, that's the raw material your thoughts get built from. If you spend hours pouring in comparison, outrage, disaster, and you're not enough, then that's exactly what the radio's gonna play at 3 a.m. You can't fill your head with poison all day and expect peace at night. Garbage in, garbage out. The radio doesn't make up its material from nothing. It plays back what you fed it. And here's the thing about that feed specifically. It's not neutral, and it's not an accident. It's designed to grab you, and the things that grab you hardest are fear, outrage, and comparison. So the feed serves you a steady diet of exactly the stuff that makes your mind darker, more anxious, more behind, because that stuff keeps you scrolling. It doesn't care about your peace. It profits from your agitation. So every hour Eddie spent in it, he was voluntarily loading his own head with the precise raw material guaranteed to torture him later. He was standing at the gate of his own mind, holding it wide open and letting the worst stuff pour in, and then wondering why his head was such a hostile place to live. Here's the open loop, because Eddie hit a real problem. He thought, okay, but I can't cut off the whole world. I can't just not know what's going on, not stay in touch, live under a rock. Guarding the gate sounds like I'm supposed to become some isolated hermit who ignores reality. That's not realistic. Fair, hold that. Does guarding the gate mean cutting off from everything? Because the answer is what let Eddie protect his mind without disappearing from the world. Let me turn to you, because your gate is wide open too, probably right now. Here's how you'd know. What's the first thing you feed your mind in the morning before your feet even hit the floor? The feed, right? A hit of other people's highlight reels and the day's disasters mainlined into your head before you're even awake. And the last thing at night? Same thing, scrolling in the dark, pouring comparison and dread into your head right before you ask it to rest. And then all day, in every spare second, more of it. You're feeding your mind a non-stop diet of the exact stuff that makes it anxious, and then wondering why you feel anxious. And here's what it costs you. You don't control your own mental weather, because you keep walking into the storm and letting it pour in. Your mood, your self-image, your sense of whether your life is okay, all of it's getting shaped by a feed that's engineered to make you feel behind and not enough. You think your thoughts are yours, but a lot of them are just the feed played back. You've been letting a machine designed to agitate you decide what your mind chews on all day. That's not your thoughts running your life. That's the feed running your life through your thoughts. Here's the answer to Eddie's problem. Does guarding the gate mean cutting off from everything? No, guarding the gate isn't building a wall, it's putting up a filter. You don't have to disappear from the world, you just have to become selective about what you let pour into your head and when. Here's the difference. A wall blocks everything. A filter lets the good stuff through and stops the poison. So Eddie didn't quit his phone or move to a cabin. He just made a few small choices about the gate. He stopped scrolling first thing in the morning, gave his mind an hour of peace before letting the world in. He stopped scrolling right before bed, quit loading the gun right before asking his head to rest. And he got a little pickier about what he fed himself, less of the stuff that left him anxious and behind, more of the stuff that left him steadier. That's not isolation. That's just deciding you control what goes into your mind, instead of letting a machine decide for you. You're still in the world. You're just guarding the door to your own head, like any sane person guards the door to their own home. You don't let just anything walk in. Here's your assignment this week. This week, guard the gate at 2 specific times, the first hour of your day and the last hour before bed. That's it. In the morning, don't reach for the feed the second you wake up. Give your mind 1 hour of peace before you let the world pour in. And at night, put the phone down before bed instead of scrolling comparison and disaster into your head right before you ask it to rest. Fill those 2 windows with almost anything else. Quiet, music, a real conversation, nothing at all. You don't have to quit your phone. You don't have to cut off the world. Just guard those 2 gates, the start and the end of your day, because those are the moments that set the tone for everything in between. Watch what happens to the radio when you stop feeding it poison at dawn and midnight. It gets quieter, because you finally stopped handing it the ammunition. You are not your thoughts. You're the one listening, so be careful what you let into the room, because the radio plays back whatever you feed it. So Eddie started guarding the gate, protected the first hour and the last, got pickier about what he poured in, and the radio, with less poison to work with, got quieter. But some nights, no matter how well he guarded the gate or watched his thoughts, the anxiety would still grab him, right in the body, a racing heart, a tight chest, and no thought he could out-argue. And Eddie was about to learn that sometimes you can't calm the mind with the mind. Sometimes you have to go through the body. Chapter 11. The body leads the mind. Eddie couldn't think his way out of a panic one night, so by accident he breathed his way out, and it worked better than any thought ever had. Here's the scene. Bad night. Eddie got hit with a wave of anxiety at the desk. No clear reason, just bam, heart pounding, chest tight, that electric jittery dread flooding through him. And he tried everything he'd learned. He tried to watch the thought, tried to name it, tried to feed the right wolf, tried to question the story. And none of it worked, because there wasn't really a thought to work with. It was just his body, in full alarm, racing and tight, and his mind scrambling to catch up. And the harder he tried to think his way calm, the worse it got, because thinking about the anxiety just fed it. So finally, frustrated, out of ideas, Eddie just stopped and took a breath, a real one, deep, slow, all the way down into his belly, and then another, and another. Long, slow breaths, out longer than in, just because he didn't know what else to do. And his body started to settle. Not instantly, but within a minute or 2 of slow breathing, the racing heart eased, the tight chest loosened, The electric dread came down a notch. And then, once his body calmed, his mind followed. The thoughts got quieter, slower, clearer. He hadn't calmed his mind and then his body. He'd calmed his body, and his mind came along for the ride. Let me pull the lesson out, because this is the piece almost everybody misses. Sometimes you can't calm the mind with the mind. Sometimes you have to go through the body. Because your mind and your body aren't separate, they're a two-way street. Everybody knows the mind affects the body, scary thought, racing heart. But almost nobody uses the street going the other way, that the body affects the mind just as powerfully. Calm the body, and the mind calms down too. It has to. It reads the body's signals and goes, "Oh, we must be safe now." And it settles. And breath is the steering wheel. Here's why breathing works when thinking doesn't. Your breath is the one part of your body's alarm system that you can directly control. You can't just decide to slow your heart rate. You can't just decide to relax your gut. But you can decide to slow your breath. And slow breathing, especially long, slow exhales, sends a direct signal to the deepest part of your nervous system that says the danger's over, stand down. And when that system stands down, the racing heart, the tight chest, the flood of dread, all of it eases. Not because you argued with it, because you spoke to it in the only language it understands, the body's language, breath. Here's the open loop, because Eddie doubted this at first. He thought, this feels too simple, too stupid. My whole life is falling apart and I'm supposed to fix it by breathing? Come on, breathing doesn't pay my rent. It doesn't fix my problems. How is something this basic supposed to actually help? That's a real doubt. It does sound too simple. Hold that. How can something as basic as breathing actually make a difference? Because the answer is what got Eddie to stop dismissing it and start using it. Let me turn to you, because you've tried to think your way out of anxiety too, and you know how well that works. Here's how it goes. You're anxious or panicky or spun up, and you try to reason with it. You try to think calming thoughts, argue yourself down, figure out why you feel this way. And it doesn't work. Usually it makes it worse, because now you're thinking about the anxiety, which just feeds it, and you're stuck in a loop of an anxious mind, trying to fix an anxious mind with more anxious thinking. It's like trying to put out a fire with more fire, and here's what it costs you. You stay stuck in the spin, sometimes for hours, because you're using the wrong tool. You keep reaching for the mind to fix a problem that's living in the body, the racing heart, the tight chest, the flooded nervous system, and the mind can't reach that stuff directly. So you white-knuckle through the panic, or you wait for it to pass on its own, never knowing that you had a steering wheel this whole time, your breath, right under your nose, literally. Here's the answer to Eddie's doubt. How can something as basic as breathing make a difference? Because it's not about the breathing being powerful, it's about it being direct. Here's the thing, your anxiety isn't just in your thoughts, it's a full physical state. Your nervous system is in alarm mode, pumping stress chemicals, racing your heart, tightening everything. You can't talk your nervous system out of alarm mode. It doesn't understand words, but it does understand breath. Slow breathing is a direct physical signal to that alarm system. It's the one manual override you've got. So when Eddie breathed slow, he wasn't thinking calm thoughts. He was reaching past his thoughts, straight into his nervous system, and flipping the switch from alarm to calm. That's why it works when thinking doesn't. Thinking talks to the wrong part of your brain. Breath talks straight to the alarm. And no, it doesn't pay the rent or fix your problems, but it calms your body enough that your mind clears. And a clear, calm mind is far better at handling the rent and the problems than a panicking one. You don't breathe to fix your life. You breathe to get calm enough to fix your life. Big difference. Here's your assignment this week, and it's the simplest one in the book. This week, when the anxiety hits you in the body, the racing heart, the tight chest, the flood of dread that you can't outthink, stop trying to think your way out. Instead, go to the breath. Breathe in slow through your nose for about 4 counts, and then breathe out slow, even longer, for about 6. In for 4, out for 6. The long exhale is the key. That's the part that flips the switch. Do that for 1 minute, maybe 2. Just slow breaths, long exhales. You don't have to fix anything with your mind. You don't have to argue with the anxiety. Just calm the body and let the mind follow. Because it will. It always does. When thinking fails, drop out of your head and into your breath. It's the steering wheel that was there the whole time. You are not your thoughts. You're the one listening. And sometimes the fastest way to quiet the radio isn't to argue with it. It's to breathe. So Eddie added the breath to his toolkit. When thinking couldn't reach the anxiety, he'd drop into his body, breathe it down, and let his mind follow into the calm. But there was one last thing his mind did that still tripped him up. Because sometimes a thought would come, a strong one, an urge, and Eddie would just obey it, like it was an order. And he was about to learn that a thought showing up doesn't mean you have to do what it says. Chapter 12. Thoughts are not commands. Eddie almost quit his own life change over a single thought one night, until he realized the thought was just talking. It wasn't the boss. Here's the scene. Rough night at the desk. Eddie was tired, discouraged, and the thought came, strong and clear. This is pointless. All this watching your thoughts stuff. Just stop. Pick up the phone, scroll for 4 hours, order the DoorDash, forget all this work you've been doing, give up. And it wasn't a whisper, it was loud, and it felt like an order, like a command he was supposed to obey. And old Eddie would have obeyed. That was the pattern of his whole life. A thought would show up, quit, escape, scroll, give up, react, and Eddie would just do it. Automatically, like the thought was a command and he was a soldier who had to follow orders. Urge to check the phone? Check the phone. Urge to snap at someone? Snap. Urge to give up? Give up. He'd never once put a gap between the thought and the action. The thought said, jump, and he jumped every time. But this night, with the watcher muscle he'd built, he caught it. He noticed the thought, give up, it's pointless, and instead of obeying it, he just looked at it, and he realized something that stopped him cold. This is just a thought. It showed up, but I don't have to do what it says. A thought is not a command, it's just a suggestion I can say no to. And he didn't obey it. He noticed the urge to give up, and he let it sit there, unfollowed. And he kept going, and the urge, unobeyed, faded on its own within a few minutes. Let me pull the lesson out, because this is where all the watching finally turns into freedom. A thought is not a command, an urge is not an order. Just because your mind says something, even loudly, even urgently, does not mean you have to do it. There's a gap between the thought and the action, and in that gap, you get to choose. The thought, give up, can show up, and you can just not give up. The urge to check your phone can show up, and you can just not check it. The thought is just a suggestion floating through. You're the one who decides whether to act on it. This is the payoff of everything. All that watcher practice, watching the thoughts, naming them, seeing they're not you, seeing they lie, it all builds to this. Because once you're the watcher, sitting in the gap, you're no longer a soldier who has to obey every order the mind barks. You're more like a boss, reviewing suggestions. A thought comes in. Quit, snap, escape, give up. And you look at it and you go, noted, not doing that one. The thought doesn't get to run your body anymore. It just gets to make a suggestion, and you get to say, no. Here's the open loop, because Eddie got confused about a limit here. He thought, wait, but some urges feel almost impossible to resist. The urge to scroll, the urge to snap when I'm angry, the urge to reach for the thing that comforts me. If thoughts aren't commands, why do some of them feel so strong, like I have to obey? Am I really supposed to be able to just say no to any urge? That doesn't seem realistic. Fair, hold that. If thoughts aren't commands, why do some feel impossible to resist? Because the answer is what let Eddie actually use this instead of feeling like a failure every time a strong urge won. Let me turn to you, because you obey your thoughts like commands too. All day. Here's how you'd know. The urge to check your phone comes. Do you pause, or does your hand just go for it automatically before you've even decided? The urge to say the sharp thing in an argument comes. Do you choose, or does it just fly out of your mouth? The urge to eat the thing, skip the workout, avoid the hard task, react to the text. Do any of these get a gap, or do you just obey instantly every time? Most people never put a single gap between the urge and the action. The thought says, do it, and they do it, and they call it just who I am, or I couldn't help it. And here's what it costs you. You're not actually running your own life. Your impulses are. Every automatic reaction, every obeyed urge, every I couldn't help it, that's a moment where a passing thought took the wheel and you just let it drive. You react instead of choose. You obey instead of decide. And a life run by whatever impulse happens to show up is a life you're not actually steering. You're just following orders from a mind that, remember, lies half the time and reaches for the worst option constantly. Here's the answer to Eddie's confusion. If thoughts aren't commands, why do some feel impossible to resist? Because a strong urge isn't a command, it's a wave. And here's the key. Waves feel like they'll never stop, like you have to act to make them end. But every wave, if you don't act on it, peaks and then fades on its own. That's the part nobody tells you. The urge to scroll, to snap, to give up. It feels unbearable in the moment, like the only way to make it stop is to obey it. But if you just don't obey it, if you sit in the gap and let the urge be there without acting, it crests and then it passes. Always. Urges are temporary. They lie about being permanent. So you don't have to fight the urge or win against it. You just have to outlast it. Notice it, name it. There's the urge to give up, and just don't act, and wait. 10 seconds, 30 seconds, a couple minutes. The wave peaks and falls, and then you're free. Eddie didn't beat the give up urge with force. He just noticed it, refused to obey it, and waited, and it faded on its own, like they all do. You're not too weak to resist strong urges. You've just never learned that you don't have to resist them forever. You only have to outlast the wave. Here's your assignment this week. This week, pick one urge you usually obey automatically. The phone check, the snap reply, the escape, whatever yours is. And one time, when it shows up, put a gap in, notice it, there's the urge. Name it as a thought, not a command, and then just don't obey it, and wait. Let the wave be there without acting on it. Watch it peak, and watch it fade. You don't have to fight it, you just have to outlast it, once. Because a thought showing up is not an order you have to follow. You're not a soldier. You're the one in the chair, reviewing the suggestions, deciding what actually gets done. And the first time you let a strong urge rise and fall without obeying it, you'll feel something huge. I don't have to do what my mind says. I'm the one in charge here. That's freedom. That's the whole thing. You are not your thoughts. You're the one listening, and the one who decides which thoughts get to become actions and which ones just get to pass. So Eddie learned to sit in the gap, to let the urges rise and fall without obeying them. And for the first time in his life, he was steering instead of being dragged. And that's exactly when it got him, because there was one night, one hard, stacked, terrible night, where all of it went out the window, and the old Eddie came roaring back like the last few months never happened. The Relapse. Chapter 13. The Relapse. Eddie fell all the way back into the noise one night, and the worst part was, he watched it happen and couldn't stop it. Here's the scene. It didn't happen on a normal night. It happened on a night when everything hit at once. Eddie got a notice about his rent going up, more than he could cover. His car finally died in the parking lot, dead battery, and the tow was money he didn't have. And earlier that day his mom had called with some bad news about a health thing in the family. 3 hits, same day, and he walked into his shift already cracked open and sat down at the desk, blue glow on his face, and the radio didn't just turn on, it exploded, and every tool he'd built, gone. He couldn't watch the thoughts, he was drowning in them. He couldn't name the feeling, there were 50 feelings at once. He couldn't feed the right wolf, the mean wolf was a monster, and it had him. He couldn't breathe it down, he didn't even think to try. The old loops came roaring back at full volume. You're a failure, you're broke, you're 33 and you've got nothing. It's all falling apart. This whole control your thoughts thing was a joke. Look at you, you're exactly who you always were. Worst case movies, old regrets, cruel stories, all of it, all at once, flooding him at 3 a.m. like the last few months of work never happened. And the sickest part, some small part of him, the watcher, still faintly there, could see it happening, could see he was drowning, and couldn't do anything about it. He just sat there in the flood, gone, lost in the noise, feeling like a total fraud. Now I need to stop the story right here, because this is the most important chapter in the whole book. If you've ever tried to change how your mind works and then had it all collapse in one bad moment, this is the one you need. Eddie relapsed completely, fell all the way back into the noise in a single hard night, and the voice that came for him afterward, driving home in the grey dawn, was the cruelest one yet. See, none of it was real. All that work and the second life got hard. You fell apart exactly like always. You didn't change. You can't change. The old Eddie is the real Eddie, and all this thought-watching stuff was just a phase, a fantasy. You're a mess, and you always will be. Why even bother anymore? And that voice, I need you to hear this, that voice is the thing that actually ends people's growth. Not the relapse, the voice after the relapse. Because here's the truth about the collapse. It's normal, not the exception, the rule. Nobody rewires 33 years of mental habits in a clean, straight line. That's a fantasy. Real change looks like progress, 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 then a hard crash under pressure, then progress again. The crash isn't the change failing. The crash is part of the change. Every single person who ever learned to master their mind fell back into the old chaos under stress more than once. The ones who made it aren't the ones who never relapsed. They're the ones who didn't believe the voice that came after. Here's the open loop, the thing Eddie had to figure out to survive that morning. The cruel voice said the relapse proved the noisy, drowning Eddie was the real one, that the calm watcher was fake, a phase. And Eddie, gutted, half believed it. So the question that decided everything was, which one is the real me? The one who drowns when it gets hard, or the calm watcher I've been building? Hold that, because the answer is what got him back to the desk instead of quitting for good. Let me turn to you because you've lived this exact collapse. Maybe not with anxiety, but you've lived it. You changed something, got calmer, more in control of your mind for a few weeks. Then one terrible day it all came flooding back and you thought, I'm right back to square one, I haven't changed at all. Built a good habit, then broke it completely under stress and heard the voice say, see, you never really changed. You're the same mess you always were. You know this collapse, the relapse, and then the crushing voice that uses the relapse as proof you should just give up and accept that this is who you are. And here's what that voice has cost you. It's taken a single bad night, survivable, normal, temporary, and turned it into a full surrender. Because you believed the relapse erased everything, so you quit. You threw away weeks of real change over one hard day, not because the hard day undid the work, but because the voice convinced you it did. The relapse never beat you. The voice after the relapse beat you, every single time. Here's the answer to Eddie's question. Which one is the real you? The real you is not the one who drowns under 3 disasters at once. That's just the oldest you, the deepest worn groove, the pattern that's had 33 years of practice. Of course it comes roaring back when everything hits at once. It's had a 33-year head start on a few months of new skills. That doesn't make it truer, it just makes it older. The real you is the one you're deliberately building, the calm watcher. And here's the proof. Even in the middle of that flood, there was a small part of Eddie watching it happen, seeing he was drowning. That watching part? That was the new Eddie, still there, not gone, just temporarily overwhelmed. The relapse didn't reveal that the noise was the real him. It just revealed that under enough stress, the old groove can still flood the new one, which of course it can. A few months doesn't erase decades, but every time he returns to the watcher, the new groove gets deeper and the old flood loses power. The relapse wasn't proof he hadn't changed. It was proof he wasn't finished changing. Nobody is, a few months in. That's not failure, that's the middle. So here's what Eddie did. He didn't quit. He drove home, felt like a fraud, heard the cruel voice, and he recognized it. That's just a thought. And thoughts lie, especially the cruel, loud ones. Everything he'd learned turned on the cruelest thought of all. And that night he went back to the desk and he watched one thought, just one, named one feeling, took a few slow breaths, got back on the horse, not all the way, just one small step back into the watcher. Because getting back up the same day you fall, that's the whole thing. Here's your assignment this week, and it's the one that protects all the others. You're gonna relapse this week, at this or at something. Under pressure, The old noise, the old habit, the old you is gonna come flooding back. I'm not hoping for it. I'm telling you because you're human, and when it does, here's the whole assignment. Get back up the same day. Don't let the collapse become a surrender. The moment you catch that you've fallen back in, you say one sentence. That's the old groove, not the real me, and I'm coming back right now. And you take one small step back into the practice. Watch one thought, name one feeling, take 3 breaths. That same day, not Monday, not when I feel better, now. And learn the cruel voice, the one that shows up after and says, "See, you never changed, you're a mess, why bother?" Learn its face this week, so that when it comes, you know exactly what it is. A thought, a loud, lying thought, hoping you'll believe it and quit. Don't believe it. That's the entire job. The relapse can't beat you. Only believing the voice can. You are not your thoughts. You're the one listening, and that includes the cruel voice that shows up after you fall. It's still just a thought, and you don't have to believe it. So Eddie got back up, same day, didn't believe the cruel voice, took one small step back into the calm, and the relapse, instead of ending him, taught him the most important thing of all. Because it showed him what the real goal was. He'd been trying to silence his mind, to force it quiet, to win, and that was never it. That was never gonna work. The real goal was something gentler and stronger than silence. Chapter 14. Steady the mind, steady the life. Eddie realized he'd been fighting his own mind like an enemy, and that the fighting itself was half the problem. Here's the scene. A few nights after the relapse, Eddie was back at the desk, blue glow, cold coffee, and he was trying hard, too hard. Every time a thought came, he pounced on it, wrestled it, tried to shove it out, tried to force his mind quiet. He was treating his thoughts like enemies to be defeated, and by 3 a.m. he was exhausted from the battle, more wound up than when he'd started. He was fighting for silence, and the fight was making everything louder. And sitting there, worn out from wrestling his own head, something clicked. I've been trying to win, trying to force my mind to shut up. But you can't force a mind quiet. The forcing is more noise. I've been fighting the radio, and the fight is just more radio. And he stopped fighting. Just let the thoughts be there. Didn't wrestle them, didn't force them out. Just let them come and go. Watched them, breathed, stayed steady while they passed through. And the strange thing? When he stopped fighting for silence, his mind got quieter on its own. Not silent, quieter, because he wasn't feeding it with the struggle anymore. Let me pull the lesson out, because this is the correction the whole book has been building toward, and it changes what you thought you were even doing. The goal was never to silence your mind. That's impossible, and chasing it just makes more noise. The goal is to steady it, and those are completely different things. Silencing is a war. It's trying to force the thoughts to stop, to win, to make your mind go blank. And it doesn't work, because a mind is going to think. That's what it does. And every time you fight it, you add more thought, more tension, more noise. You can't get to quiet by fighting. Fighting is loud. But steadying isn't a war. Steadying is what Eddie was really after this whole time. Not a blank, silent mind, but a calm one. A mind where the thoughts still come, but they don't run you. Where the radio still plays, but softly, in the background, and you're the calm watcher, steady in the middle of it, not thrown around by every song. You're not trying to stop the storm. You're trying to become the steady sky the storm passes through. The sky doesn't fight the clouds, it just holds still and lets them move across it. And that stillness, that steadiness, is the whole goal. And here's what pulls all 14 chapters together. Everything Eddie learned, watching the thoughts, seeing they're not him, seeing they lie, dropping the old tapes, walking out of the worst-case movies, feeding the right wolf, naming the fog, choosing the story, guarding the gate, breathing, sitting in the gap. None of it was ever about silencing his mind. It was all about steadying it, about becoming the calm watcher who can let the whole storm pass through without being swept away. Not a quiet mind, a steady you in the middle of whatever the mind is doing. Here's the open loop, because Eddie worried about one last thing. He thought, okay, but if I'm not trying to silence my mind and I'm just letting the thoughts be there, isn't that just giving up? Am I just supposed to accept the noise forever, let the anxiety and the loops just happen and do nothing? That sounds like surrender. Fair worry, hold that. Is steadying just giving up and accepting the noise? Because the answer is the difference between real peace and just going numb, and Eddie needed to land it. Let me turn to you, because you're probably fighting your mind too. Here's how you'd know. When you're anxious, do you try to force yourself calm? Stop being anxious, just relax, shut up, brain, and find it makes you more anxious. When a thought you don't like comes, do you try to shove it away, wrestle it down, and find it comes back louder? Most people who try to work on their minds make Eddie's exact mistake. They treat it as a war, a fight for silence, a battle to win. And they lose every time and get more wound up, because you cannot fight your way to peace. The war is the opposite of peace, and here's what it costs you. You exhaust yourself fighting a battle that can't be won, and you conclude, I can't control my mind, this doesn't work for me. When really, you were just using force where you needed stillness. You were trying to win a fight when the answer was to stop fighting. You made peace into a war, and then wondered why you never found peace. Here's the answer to Eddie's worry. Is steadying just giving up? No, and here's the crucial difference. Giving up is passive, it's drowning, letting the noise sweep you away, doing nothing. Steadying is active, it's staying present, staying the watcher, holding steady while the thoughts pass. Look, when Eddie stopped fighting, he wasn't surrendering to the noise. He was doing something much harder and more skillful, staying calm and aware in the middle of the noise without either fighting it or drowning in it. That's not passive, that takes real presence. He was still watching, still breathing, still choosing not to obey the urges, still feeding the right wolf. He just stopped wrestling. There's a difference between letting thoughts pass and letting thoughts win. Letting them pass is steady. You watch them go by, calm, untouched. Letting them win is drowning. You get swept into them. Steadying is the narrow path right between fighting and drowning. You don't grab the thoughts, and you don't let them grab you. You just stay steady while they move through. That's not giving up. That's the most active, skillful thing a mind can do, and it's the only thing that actually leads to peace. Here's your assignment this week, and it's the graduation of everything. This week, stop trying to silence your mind and start trying to steady yourself instead. When the thoughts come, the anxious ones, the loud ones, the ones you don't want, don't fight them and don't drown in them. Just stay steady. Watch them pass like clouds across a still sky. Breathe. Stay the watcher. Let them come and go without either wrestling them or getting swept away. And notice the difference. When you stop fighting for silence, the noise settles on its own. Because you're not feeding it with the struggle anymore. You're not trying to win, you're just being the steady sky. That's the whole thing. Not a silent mind, a steady you. And a steady you can handle anything the mind throws, because you're no longer at war with your own head. You are not your thoughts. You're the one listening, steady, calm, and unshaken, while the whole storm passes through. So Eddie stopped fighting and started steadying, became the calm sky instead of battling the clouds, and his mind, no longer fed by the struggle, finally settled into something like peace. And there was one more night I want to tell you about, the last one, because it brings this whole thing full circle, back to a man at a desk at 3 a.m., blue light on his face, a radio in his head. Except everything's different now. Let me take you there. Chapter 15. The Man at the Quiet Desk. It's 3 a.m. and Eddie is sitting at the desk, and his mind is quiet. Let that land for a second, because that's the whole story right there. Same desk, same 6 grey monitors showing 6 empty hallways, same blue-white glow washing over his face in the dark, same low hum of the vending machine in the corner, same cold cup of gas station coffee by his elbow, same hour, 3 a.m., the hour that used to be the loudest, cruelest hour of his life, and Eddie is just sitting there, steady, present, quiet. Not because the radio is gone. That's the thing I need you to understand. The thoughts still come. A worry about the rent drifts by, and Eddie watches it drift past and doesn't climb in. An old memory surfaces, and he notices it and lets it go, because he already learned whatever it had to teach him. The mind still plays. But Eddie isn't fused to it anymore. He's the watcher now, the calm sky, and the thoughts are just clouds moving across it, and none of them own him. He takes a slow breath, long on the exhale, just because it feels good now. And he sits in the quiet at the center of himself, that calm place he found watching a spider all those months ago, the place that was there underneath the whole time, that he never knew to look for. Let me pull it all the way back, because this was never really about Eddie, and you've known that since the first minute. Think about where he started. A man at this same desk, at this same 3 a.m., arguing out loud with a boss who wasn't there, wincing at a memory from 14 years ago that nobody else remembered, running worst-case movies of disasters that never came, a head like a radio bolted to the inside of his skull with the knob broken off, noise all night, fear and regret and comparison on an endless loop, and no idea it was even separate from him. He thought that radio was him. He thought the noise was his whole self. And look at him now. Same job, same $19 an hour, same apartment, same little car, same life on paper. Some things don't change, but the man is completely different in the only way that matters. Because he learned the one thing that changes everything, that he was never the radio. He was always the one listening. And once he knew that, once he could watch the thoughts instead of drowning in them, name the feelings, feed the right wolf, breathe down the panic, sit in the gap, steady himself in the storm, the noise stopped running his life. He got his life back, not by silencing his mind, by finally understanding it wasn't him. And here's what I need you to take with you tonight, the whole thing pressed down into one truth. That voice in your head, the anxious one, the cruel one, the one running the worst-case movies at 3 a.m., the one that's probably going right now as you listen, that voice is not you. It never was. It's a radio. It's thoughts, arriving on their own, uninvited, half of them lies, most of them fear. And you are not the radio, you are the one who can hear it, the watcher, the calm, steady awareness underneath all the noise, the sky the storm passes through. That place is in you right now. It's been in you the whole time. You just never knew to look for it because you were too busy believing you were the storm. And here's what that means for you, starting tonight. You are not stuck with the noise. You don't have to believe every scary thought, obey every urge, drown in every feeling, or live inside the darkest story your mind can tell. You can step back, you can watch, you can name it, question it, breathe through it, and let it pass. Not by fighting your mind, you can't win that war. By steadying yourself in the middle of it, by remembering every time the radio gets loud that you're not the radio, you're the one listening. And the one listening is always calm, always steady, always okay, no matter how loud the storm gets. So here's the last thing. Not a big assignment, the smallest one, the one that started it all. Tonight, after this, when you lie down and the radio starts up the way it does, the worries and the replays and the worst-case movies, I want you to do one thing. Don't fight it, just notice it, and say to yourself quietly, there's the radio, and I'm the one listening. That's it, just that. Step back into the watcher's seat one time tonight and feel the tiny gap open up between you and the noise, because that gap is where your whole life is waiting. That's where Eddie started, one moment of noticing at one desk at 1:03 a.m., and it walked him all the way to a quiet mind and a steady life. It can walk you there too. It starts with one breath, one noticing, one small step back from the noise. The radio's gonna keep playing, friend. That's okay. You were never meant to shut it off. You were only ever meant to remember one thing, the thing Eddie found at that quiet desk, the thing I want you to carry out of here tonight and for the rest of your life. You are not your thoughts. You're the one listening.